Welcome to Dusky Lore. Close your eyes, dim the lights, and listen closely as the shadows begin to speak. Story 1. My wife Romy and I had spent months planning a getaway. We were both exhausted from work. She is a teacher, and I work in sales. So when we found an Airbnb on a small island off the coast of Florida, it seemed like the perfect destination. The place looked spectacular in the photos. A 2-bedroom cabin right on the beach, surrounded by palm trees and with a direct view of the ocean. And the price, only $150 per night for an entire week. It was much cheaper than any other option we had seen. I remember thinking, this sounds too good to be true, but we booked it anyway. Looking back, we should have paid attention to the reviews. Several mentioned that the owner charged extra fees for anything. $200 if a chair was moved out of place, or if a dirty plate was left in the sink. Many guests described him as a very strict person, but we assumed those were exaggerations from difficult customers. We were too excited to switch into vacation mode to worry about it. 2 nights before leaving, I received a message from the host through the Airbnb app. His name was Mr. Heron, and he asked if he could call me on the phone. I had booked dozens of Airbnbs before, and never had a host ask to speak with me by phone. It struck me as odd, but I did not want to cancel at the last minute. I am not exactly the most comfortable person on phone calls, but I agreed. He called right away, and we talked for about 20 minutes. At first, he was friendly. He asked what I did for a living, why we were traveling, and what Romy did for work. Everything sounded polite, but then he started asking more personal questions, like about our daily routines. I thought it was strange, although I took it as simple friendliness. After the call, he sent me a 27-page PDF with the house rules. Yes, 27 pages. It was insane. There were instructions like, do not touch the thermostat. No visitors allowed. Furniture must remain exactly in its original position, and even detailed cleaning instructions for every room. He asked me to confirm that I had read it, and he also requested Romy's full name, phone number, and email address, for emergency reasons, according to him. We skimmed through it and replied yes, just to get it over with. On the day of the trip, we took the ferry to the island. The scenery was stunning. Crystal clear water, quiet beaches, and very few tourists. When we arrived, the house looked exactly like it did in the photographs. A white exterior, a wraparound porch, and a few steps leading directly onto the sand. However, once we went inside, we noticed that the interior had a somewhat outdated feel. The couches had very old floral patterns. The walls were covered in 1980s wood paneling, and the floor creaked when we walked. Nothing that ruined the trip. We were not looking for luxury, just rest, so we let it slide. We unpacked our things and went to the kitchen to make dinner. That was when something caught our attention. Everything was labeled. Absolutely everything. There were stickers on the cabinets that said plates, bowls, and silverware. Even the refrigerator shelves were marked with instructions. Milk here, vegetables only. It seemed like the owner had an obsession with order, or maybe with control. He was so meticulous that it felt as if the house were ready for an inspection, not for a vacation. From the very beginning, I had a strange feeling, as if someone were watching us. Romy felt it too. Sometimes while we were talking in the living room, we thought we could hear a faint click or a barely noticeable hum. We did not see any visible cameras nor a smart doorbell or anything like that. But there was a modern Wi-Fi thermostat on one of the walls, and it stood out because everything else was old. A rotary phone in the hallway, an old television with antennas. Why would there be a smart device in such an outdated house? We laughed it off and decided to enjoy the trip. We spent the days swimming, walking on the beach, and cooking together. But that feeling of being watched never completely went away. At night, I would lie awake staring at the ceiling with the uncomfortable idea that there might be eyes on us. On the 3rd night, a storm rolled in. The thunder shook the windows, and the power went out for about 5 minutes. Nothing unusual for an island. But when the electricity came back, the Wi-Fi stopped working. I walked over to the router to restart it, and right then I got a message from Mr. Heron through the Airbnb app. Power outage. My housekeeper told me her power went out too. I see that the thermostat disconnected. Please restore the Wi-Fi connection as soon as possible. How the hell did he know that? Supposedly he was on the mainland several hours away. The housekeeper lived nearby, yes, but why would she inform him immediately? And more importantly, how did he know the thermostat was offline? Romy and I just stared at each other, frozen. Then we understood. He had remote access to the thermostat. But why was he so concerned about the Wi-Fi connection? I replied that everything was fine, although my mind could no longer stop spinning. After that message, something inside me switched on. I started looking at the house with different eyes, paying closer attention to the small details. In the living room, I noticed a smoke detector that looked a little bigger than usual. I climbed onto a chair to check it more closely, and to my horror, I discovered a tiny lens hidden inside it. It was a hidden camera. My heart nearly stopped. I checked the other detectors. The one in the kitchen had the exact same thing. In the end, we found 4 cameras in total. One in the living room, one in the kitchen, one in the hallway, and the last one in the bedroom, pointed directly at the bed. Romy froze, and then she exploded in panic. "He has been watching us this whole time," she whispered furiously. We quickly covered the lenses with tape, even though we knew it was already too late. If those cameras had been recording, the owner had already seen everything. Us unpacking, eating, and even changing clothes. That night we barely slept. Every creak in the floor made us jump. I could not stop thinking about the phone call, the personal questions he had asked us, that endless PDF full of absurd rules. One of the sections clearly said, "Do not tamper with the house devices." Now everything made sense, and the part about asking for Romy's full information. Was it really for safety? Or was he tracking us somehow? The uneasiness turned into fear. The next morning I sent him a direct message asking about the cameras. His response was cold, almost indifferent. "They are only for security. It is common in rentals." But we knew that Airbnb requires hosts to disclose any cameras, visible or not, and he had never done that. We thought about leaving, but the problem was the ferry. It only ran twice a day, and on top of that, we had already paid for the entire stay in advance. We tried to stay calm, although the tension kept building. That afternoon, while Romy was taking a nap, I heard the sound of an engine outside. I looked through the blinds and saw a black SUV parked at the end of the street, with the engine still running. It stayed there for about 30 minutes and no one got out. Then it slowly drove away. A coincidence? Maybe, but something inside me told me it was not. Hours later, Mr. Heron wrote again. "Enjoying the beach? I see the weather is excellent today." I went cold. We had not posted anything on social media or mentioned our plans. Romy checked her phone. Location services were turned off. Then it hit us. Maybe he was spying on us through the Wi-Fi. Maybe he had installed some kind of software to monitor our devices. We disconnected every device from the network and started using only mobile data. That very night, we decided to pack our things and leave earlier than planned. We followed every cleaning rule in the PDF to the letter, just to avoid giving him any excuse. While I was moving the bed, I found something underneath it, a small notebook with handwritten notes. It said things like, "Guests arrived at 3 p.m. They unpacked in the bedroom," and other detailed descriptions of what the people staying there had done. Some of the dates matched the reviews I had read earlier. One entry said, "The couple argued in the kitchen, additional cleaning charge." It was obvious. That man wrote everything down and watched everything. Romy tried to contact Airbnb support, but the signal on the island was weak and the call kept dropping. Even so, she managed to briefly explain the situation. They told her they would open an investigation, but that we would have to stay one more night before anything could officially be resolved. That last night was an absolute nightmare. We blocked the doors with chairs, left all the lights on, and tried to stay awake. The silence was so thick that any sound made us jump. At around 2 a.m, the power went out again, but this time for longer. The house was left completely dark, and the sound of the wind hitting the windows only made the tension worse. Suddenly, I heard a soft scraping on the glass, as if something or someone was trying to get in. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, but then my phone vibrated. It was a message from Mr. Heron. The Wi-Fi went down again. My housekeeper will go check. We were petrified. How did he know that again? And right in the middle of the night. Moments later, we saw car lights shining through the curtains. I looked carefully. It was the same black SUV from earlier, parked in front of the house. Romy whispered to me, trembling, "It's him. He's here." We locked ourselves in the bathroom and stayed silent, listening to every sound. The noise of the engine continued for a few more minutes until the vehicle slowly drove away. The scratching at the window stopped. Shortly afterward, the power came back on, but it was impossible to sleep. We spent the rest of the night awake, waiting for sunrise. When the sun finally came up, we grabbed our things in a rush and fled to the ferry without looking back. The ride back felt endless. As soon as we reached the mainland, I checked the app and saw that Mr. Heron had left us a review. Excellent guests, followed all the rules, 5 stars. I could not believe his audacity. We immediately reported everything to Airbnb, with photos, messages, and details of what had happened. Eventually, they suspended his listing, but that did not erase what we had lived through. To this day, I still check my accounts and devices from time to time, afraid that man may still be spying on us. What seemed like paradise at a bargain price turned out to be a perfectly set trap. If an offer ever seems too good to be true, run. We learned that the hard way. Story 2. 2 years ago, on a rainy Thursday night in Tacoma, Washington, I was heading home after my closing shift at work. It was late, around 10:45 p.m. At the time, I did not have a car, and the last bus only dropped me off halfway, so I still had about a 15-minute walk to my apartment. I was wearing a black rain jacket with the hood up, and I was holding a small umbrella that barely managed to keep me dry. My phone battery was low, maybe around 12%. The street shimmered under the yellowish streetlights, wet and glossy from the rain. Everything was quiet except for the distant murmur of cars and the steady tapping of water against my umbrella. At first, everything seemed normal. I walked past the laundromat, the one that always had a light left on even after closing. Then I crossed by a vape shop that was already dark for the night. That was when I heard it. Footsteps behind me. They were not too close, but they kept a steady pace. I turned my head slightly and saw a man about half a block away. He was wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. He did not look directly at me, but he was heading in the same direction I was. I tried to calm myself down. People walk at night. It is nothing. Still, an uneasy feeling started to settle in my stomach. I crossed the street at a faded crosswalk. He crossed too. I slowed down near a taco shop that had closed an hour earlier, pretending to adjust my shoelace. The man slowed down too. My heart started beating faster. I picked up my pace. The footsteps behind me grew louder, heavier than mine. I gripped the umbrella handle tightly and kept my eyes forward. I did not want to look at him. I no longer believed it was a coincidence. I needed to get somewhere safe. The only store that still had its lights on was a small convenience store 1 block away. I pushed open the glass door and the bell gave off a familiar ding. The warm air smelled like old coffee and stale candy. Behind the counter, a man in a baseball cap greeted me with a slight nod. I grabbed a bottle of water and a pack of gum, things I did not need just to look casual. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the man in the hoodie stop under the awning outside, right in front of the entrance. He did not come in. He just stood there staring at the door, completely still. I walked over to the clerk and whispered, "I think someone followed me here." The man looked out the window, then back at me calmly and said, "You can stay here for a while if you want." I thanked him, paid with shaking hands, and stayed near the hot dog machine, pretending to check my phone. My battery was already down to 7%. Outside, the man was still there. Then all of a sudden, a white van pulled up to the curb behind him. It was an old cargo van with no side windows, dirty paint, a dent above the rear wheel, and a missing hubcap on the front passenger side. The man looked at the vehicle, opened the passenger door, and got in. The van idled for a few seconds before slowly driving away down the street. I felt relieved, although my body was still tense. I waited about 5 more minutes, convincing myself that the danger had passed. I thanked the clerk and stepped back out into the rain. This time I chose the main avenue, which was brighter and busier, instead of the smaller side streets. I walked quickly with my keys between my fingers, the way my mother had taught me. The street was nearly empty, just a few headlights passing by now and then. As I passed a bakery with a faded pink sign, I heard the sound of an engine behind me, moving slowly. I turned around. It was the same white van following alongside me. I could make out a silhouette behind the windshield. I did not think twice. I made a sharp turn into the first alley I saw, splashing through puddles. The air smelled like wet garbage and oil. There were metal dumpsters against one wall and old pallets stacked against fences. I ran as fast as I could, the umbrella banging against my side. The vehicle stopped at the entrance to the alley, its headlights casting light against the bricks. I hid behind a dumpster, crouched down, holding my breath. The engine was still running. Then I heard the sound of a sliding door, and after that, silence. In the distance, maybe half a block away, I saw a police cruiser stopped under a traffic light. That simple sight gave me an indescribable sense of hope. I ran out from my hiding spot and waved my arms. "Help!" I shouted. A female police officer stepped out of the vehicle, raising her hand. "What is going on?" she asked. I pointed toward the alley, gasping for breath. A white van. A guy followed me, then got into it, and it started following me again. "It is right there." She opened the back door of the patrol car and told me to get in. Then she radioed it in and drove toward the alley. But when we got there was nothing there. My umbrella was lying in a puddle, but the van had disappeared. She asked me for a description, and I told her everything in detail. It was an old white van, no side windows, dirty paint, a dent above the rear wheel on the driver's side, and no hubcap on the front passenger side. The man had on a hoodie and short beard. I did not catch the license plate. She nodded and said, "You did the right thing by coming straight to me. Next time, call 911 without waiting." She turned on the patrol car lights and slowly drove through the surrounding streets. But the van never appeared again. I felt a knot in my stomach thinking about how quickly it had vanished. The officer offered to drive me home. I lived a little over a mile away, so I accepted. Inside the car, I finally felt safe, watching the rain slide down the windshield. She wrote down a few notes, then handed me a card with her name and a case number. "We will keep an eye out tonight," she said. "Take care." She waited in her car until I got inside my building. I locked the door twice and sank to the floor, still wearing my soaked clothes. My phone died, but for the first time all night, I felt like I was out of danger. The next morning, I went back to the store in daylight to look for my umbrella. It was gone. The clerk recognized me right away and asked if I was okay. I told him yes, that it was all over now. He mentioned that he had seen that same white van around the area before, but he never knew who it belonged to. That day I bought pepper spray and swore I would never walk home alone that late again. They never caught the people in that vehicle. And even now when it rains, I sometimes think I hear footsteps behind me. And I cannot help imagining that old white van moving slowly along the edge of the curb. Story 3. This happened last year when I decided to sell my old desk. It was a basic IKEA one that I had kept in my bedroom for years. I had replaced it with an adjustable standing desk for work, so I measured it, took some photos, and listed it on Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist. In the listing, I made it very clear that the desk was on the 3rd floor of a building with no elevator, and that it required 2 people to carry it. That same afternoon, a man messaged me. His profile had no photo, only a first name. He asked if I still had it and whether I accepted cash. Nothing else. I replied that I did, but I reminded him that he would need to come up 3 flights of stairs. He only responded with a thumbs up. I live in a small brick building with a buzzer that barely works. Usually when someone arrives, they message me and I go downstairs to meet them. I plan to watch him from outside before letting him in. As a precaution, I also texted a friend to let her know I was meeting with a buyer. I left my apartment door cracked open, held in place with a shoe so I would not have to fumble for my keys later. The man arrived just after sunset in a silver sedan. The trunk was already open, and inside there was a folded moving blanket, bungee cords, and a long rope. He got out of the car wearing a baseball cap and a hoodie. He did not smile or say hello, just gave a short nod, as if we had some unspoken agreement beyond selling a piece of furniture. 3rd floor? He asked. Yes, I replied. It is not very heavy, but it is awkward. I will need your help. He looked toward the entrance and said flatly, No thanks, I'll wait outside. I thought he was joking and gave a nervous laugh. I can't carry it by myself. He did not respond. He just looked up at the building as if he were counting the windows. I stood there until he finally shrugged. Fine, he said at last. We walked upstairs. His footsteps were slow and dragging. On the 2nd floor landing, he asked me, Does anyone else live with you? I lied. I told him my roommate worked the night shift. In reality, I live alone, but I did not want him to know that. When we reached my door, he stopped right at the threshold. He leaned slightly, looking inside, the deadbolts, the layout, even the ring camera in the hallway. He did not step inside until I moved toward the desk. Nice place, he commented. Quiet building. We took the desk by opposite ends and started moving it out of the room. Halfway down the hallway, he said something so casual and so chilling that it made me freeze. You probably heard about the woman who was raped and murdered through Craigslist recently, right? I went completely still. The edge of the desk dug into my side. No, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Yeah, he said with a faint smile. People are crazy. I wanted to drop the desk and throw him out, but we were already halfway to the exit, and blocking the door would have been worse. I would have been trapped inside with him. I focused only on getting it over with as quickly as possible. We carried the desk downstairs in silence. He barely held it with 2 fingers, never once touching the handrail. Outside, the street was dark and empty. Usually one of my neighbors smokes on the fire escape, but that night no one was there. The sedan was still running, with the trunk open. The ropes and bungee cords were already laid out, as if he had planned that exact moment. It should fit, he muttered. He pulled out a wad of cash held together with a rubber band. The bills were worn, as if they had passed through too many hands. He counted them slowly and handed me the exact amount. He did not try to negotiate or ask for a receipt. Nothing. We loaded the desk into the trunk and he secured it with a rope that hung loose beneath the latch. Then he stepped back, looked up at my windows and said, "Doesn't this ever scare you?" "I'm careful," I replied. "Good," he said. "You should be." He got into the car and drove away. The loose rope slapped against the bumper as the car turned the corner. I went back up to my apartment, locked both deadbolts, texted my friend that it was over, and sat on the couch replaying his words over and over in my head. There was something in his tone, in the precise way he said them. It was not casual conversation. He wanted them to stay with me. I turned on my laptop and searched Craigslist murder, along with the name of my city. Nothing came up. Only old cases from other states, recycled rumors. It was not a warning. It was something he had chosen to say right after asking if I lived alone. I checked the Ring camera footage. At one point, it looked like he tilted his cap to cover his face. Maybe it was my imagination, but I saved the clip anyway. Around midnight, the buzzer rang. One long press. No voice on the intercom. I stood looking through the peephole for several minutes, but the hallway was empty. Then my phone vibrated. An unknown number. The message said, "Is the desk still available?" The sender had the same name as the buyer, as if he had forgotten that he had already bought it. I did not answer. I blocked the number, deleted the listing, and reported him on the app. That night I slept with a chair wedged under the doorknob. I woke up several times because of noises that never would have bothered me before. Pipes, footsteps in the hallway, cars in the distance. For weeks, every time I saw a silver sedan, my heart started racing. Every man in a baseball cap looked like him. I started walking with my keys between my fingers, like an improvised weapon. I stopped posting anything that included my address, and if I needed to sell something, I only did it in public places, usually in the parking lot of a police station. I even bought a dolly so I would never have to depend on a stranger again. What still haunts me most is not what he did, but what he said. That sentence had nothing to do with buying the desk. He dropped it on purpose to make me feel vulnerable, to remind me that he had thought about what could happen in an empty stairwell. He left with a desk, yes, but he also took something else. My sense of safety in my own home. If I could go back, I would have closed the door the moment he refused to help. I would have given the desk away or left it there. But I convinced myself that it was just one more step, that it would all be over soon. I am sharing this now because it still lingers in my mind. There was no crime, no police report, no news story. But sometimes the most terrifying moments are the ones that leave no evidence. Just one sentence, one rope in the trunk, and the memory of a man who wanted me to imagine what could have happened. Story 4. I moved to Cleveland, Ohio, in the fall of 2010 to begin my master's degree at Cleveland State University. I rented a small basement apartment in a building on Euclid Avenue. If I cut across Chester and past Rhodes Tower, I could get to the academic department in about 10 minutes. The building smelled like dust, old carpet, and printer toner. It was a constant smell, almost comforting. By October, I was offered a part-time job in the department, answering phones, organizing schedules, updating donor lists, and helping with recruitment. I accepted without hesitation. Tuition and rent were not paid with pride. The department chair was an older Jewish man named Dr. Leonard Katz, although everyone simply called him Doc. He wore wool sweaters that shed lint and carried a heavy metal ashtray that looked like it had come out of an old restaurant. He smoked a pipe and he always packed it too tightly. The university had banned smoking in offices years earlier, but his office was at the end of the hallway, just past the copy room. He kept the door cracked open and a fan in the window. He smoked anyway. Doc loved to talk. He told me stories about his parents in Brooklyn, the temple his grandfather had helped build, and the Hebrew words he said I ought to learn. He taught me every part of my job, and then he started teaching me parts of his. Over time, I began helping with recruitment visits, alumni events, and donor presentations. We brought money into the program, and everyone preferred to look the other way about the smoke. Before graduate school, I had trained as an emergency medical technician, so he asked me to take his blood pressure a couple of times a week. He suffered from gout, hypertension, and a heart that got tired more easily than he was willing to admit. He wrote the numbers down on sticky notes and slid them under his bronze paperweight. On Mondays, I brought him a jar of homemade soup from my grandmother. Doc would open the jar, breathe in the steam, and close his eyes for a moment, as if savoring a memory. By the time winter arrived, the routine already felt permanent. I came in early, just as the sun was rising. I turned on the fluorescent lights, made the coffee, and answered emails in the silence of the building. Doc would show up in the middle of the morning with folders under his arm, his pipe in his pocket, and his ashtray clinking in his hand. He always tapped the bowl against the edge of the ashtray, even when it was already clean. One afternoon near the end of winter, he called me at home. His voice sounded muted, measured. He said he had not been able to urinate all day. I told him I would call his son, who lived in Shaker Heights, and then call an ambulance. Paramedics from university hospitals took him to the Cleveland Medical Center. A nurse told me later that he would not have survived another day like that. They were able to relieve the obstruction, and I still remember the look of relief on his face. He did not know where to rest his eyes. He was transferred to a rehabilitation center at Menorah Park in Beechwood. It was a clean, quiet place with large windows. I visited him every few days, bringing folders so he could stay updated on the work. He marked names, wrote cramped notes in the margins, and instructed me on which alumni I should contact and how I should approach them. He said he missed the echo of our hallway. At the end of February, a colleague called his room to see how he was doing. A paramedic answered. They suspected a stroke. They asked us to notify the family. Doc died later that same day at the Cleveland Clinic. The funeral was a few days later, in a small chapel on Taylor Road in Cleveland Heights. There was sleet in the parking lot. His son thanked me for the soup. I did not know what to say. The first week in the office without him felt strange in a way that is hard to describe. I packed up his computer and his phone, labeled everything with blue tape, and left the metal ashtray right in the middle of the desk. No one wanted to touch it. The smell of tobacco in the hallway started to fade until it became a sweet note, barely noticeable. 1 week after the funeral, I arrived at work before everyone else, as always. It was still dark outside, and the building still had the heat turned low. I unlocked the office, turned on the lights, and set my bag on the desk. Then the phone rang. No one ever called that early. I answered without my usual greeting. Hello. It was not a voice. It was not silence. Just static. A steady whisper, like a radio out of tune. And then suddenly metal against metal. I stood up so fast that the chair rolled into the filing cabinet. It was the same sound as always. Doc emptying his pipe into the ashtray. There was no doubt. I had heard it 1,000 times. The noise stopped, and on the line there was a long, close breath, like someone who did not want to speak. Then a click. I looked at the caller ID, internal, and the 4 digits of Doc's extension. The same one he had had since my first day. The same one still printed in the old directory taped inside the supply closet. I walked down the empty hallway to his office. The light above the door was off. The lock had not been changed yet, so I used my key and went in. The ashtray was still there in the middle of the desk. Just a couple specks of ash. The phone was not. I had packed it away myself inside a metal box in the copy room. The line had been disconnected the week before. I put the key away and told myself I had imagined the number. that I had confused the sounds. I told myself many things, until the others started arriving and the normal noise of the office covered everything. Later that morning, Officer James O'Malley from Campus Police appeared at my door. His face looked pale. He asked whether everything was all right on our floor. I said yes, out of habit. He shook his head and looked toward the hallway. He told me that shortly after dawn, while making his rounds. He had seen Doc walk past the copy room and enter his office. The same sweater, the same measured walk. The door closed. The light did not come on. O'Malley hesitated over whether he should knock. He did not. When he came back a few minutes later, the hallway was empty. He wrote down the time on his clipboard and continued his route because he did not know what else to do. I did not tell him about the call. He did not ask anything more either. He left, and for a moment the doorframe looked too bright. That afternoon, the smell of tobacco returned. Not strong, not throughout the whole hallway, just in the square of carpet right in front of his office. That cheap, sweet blend that lingered on your tongue. I stood there longer than necessary, breathing that air and looking at the closed door with a nameplate that would soon be replaced. The semester ended, then another. I graduated the following year and got a job on the other side of the city. Sometimes I came back to campus for meetings. Every time I passed the 4th floor, the hallway looked a little more worn. A new department head occupied Doc's office. The ashtray disappeared, stored away in some back room. In the fall of 2018, I came back to give a talk. I arrived early and walked through the building out of habit. The hallway was cool, a little dim. The new department head had a glass plaque where Doc's paper sign had once hung. I went into the copy room to print my handouts and saw a familiar cardboard box on the top shelf. The folded flaps, blue tape, black marker. Doc's name, written in his cramped handwriting. I lifted one of the flaps. Inside was the old telephone handset, the coiled cord neatly wrapped. A small yellow sticker said, "Disconnected, March 2011. I closed the box again and stood still, with my hand resting on top of it. Then I heard it. One single clean strike of metal against metal, coming from the hallway. It was not loud or dramatic, just a simple sound, out of place in a building where no one had smoked in years. I stepped out and looked both ways. The corridor was empty. I took a deep breath and caught just barely the faint, sweet smell of Doc's tobacco, a scent that no longer belonged to anyone living. Before leaving that day, I stopped by telecommunications, pretending I was looking for a practical detail so I could feel sane. I asked about the internal call records. The technician checked and told me that Doc's line had been physically disconnected in March of that year. No forwarding, no bridge. No possible way an internal call could have come from it after that. I thanked him, went back to the elevator, and watched the numbers go up, then down, then up again when someone else pressed another floor. Now when I visit the building and pass that corner, I do not stop. Sometimes a hallway is just a hallway. Sometimes it is not. Story 5. It was a cool day in October 2019 when my wife Sophia, our 6-year-old son Tommy, and I decided to take a family trip to the famous Virginia pumpkin patch near Gretna, Nebraska. Some friends had spoken very highly of the place, one of the most popular fall destinations in the state, with hayrack rides, pumpkin picking, and a huge corn maze covering about 10 hectares. We live in Omaha, so the drive was short, only about 30 minutes. Tommy was incredibly excited. He kept bouncing in his seat, saying he wanted to get lost in the maze, like in his cartoons. Sophia and I laughed, thinking it would be the perfect outing before the real cold weather arrived. We got there around noon. The place was full of families, kids running around with caramel apples, and the air smelled like cider donuts and dry leaves. We started with the calmer activities, We picked pumpkins, took a hayride, and fed the goats at the small petting zoo. Tommy enjoyed every second of it. Then we went to the corn maze. The sign said it was family-friendly, but that it could take up to an hour to finish. They handed us a map at the entrance, although Tommy insisted on playing hide-and-seek. "Come on, Dad. I'll hide and you find me," he said, grinning from ear to ear. Sophia rolled her eyes and agreed on one condition. "Fine, but we do not split up." The cornfield was taller than I had imagined, over 7 feet high. The dry stalks crackled in the wind, and the paths twisted in every direction, full of dead ends and loops. We started playing. Tommy ran around laughing and hid behind the corn walls. The first few times I found him quickly, but then he started running farther away, shouting, "You can't catch me." Sophia and I spread out a little to cover more ground, calling for him between laughs. But after about 10 minutes, he stopped answering. "Tommy, this isn't funny anymore," I shouted. Sophia's voice sounded worried. "Honey, come out now. This is not the time to play." We kept looking for him, but the maze was confusing. Every turn looked the same. The sun was still high, so we did not panic. We passed other families, but no one had seen a child alone. At 4 p.m., the loudspeakers announced that the maze would be closing soon. We went to the exit stand and told an employee that our son had gotten separated from us. He used the radio to contact other workers. One of them told us in a casual tone, "Don't worry, kids hide all the time. He'll turn up." But when the crowd started to thin out, a hollow feeling took over me. Sophia was crying. We went to the car, grabbed flashlights, and returned to the maze, even though they were already closing it. Night fell quickly. By 6 o'clock, everything was dark, moonless, with only stars overhead and the whisper of wind moving through the dry leaves. We shouted his name over and over. "Tommy, where are you?" Our voices echoed through the stalks, but there was no answer. There was almost no phone signal. Still, we called 911. The operator said officers were on the way, but it would take about 20 minutes. "Do not leave the area," she told us, but we could not stand still. We moved deeper into the maze, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. After about an hour, Sophia saw something in a muddy puddle just off the path. It was Tommy's little red sneaker, stuck in the dirt as if it had fallen off. My blood ran cold. "Oh my God," Sophia whispered. Around it, there were small footprints that disappeared into the plants, and beside them, large boot prints. Then we heard it. A low whistle like someone calling a dog. Close. Then a rustling among the stalks. "Who's there?" I shouted, aiming my flashlight. Nothing. We followed the tracks, our hearts pounding. The maze seemed endless, as if it were changing shape. Sophia grabbed my arm. What if someone took him? I did not want to say it, but I had thought the same thing. Nebraska has its transients, people drifting through on trains, hiding in fields, living among the crops, isolated places. And sometimes, people disappear. In a small clearing inside the cornfield, we found signs of life, trash, empty cans, a dirty sleeping bag, and cigarette butts. Someone had been living there. My stomach turned. Suddenly, a rough male voice came from the shadows. "You're looking for the boy, huh?" We froze. A tall figure stepped out from between the stalks, wearing a ragged coat. His face was half hidden, but I saw wild eyes and an unkempt beard. "He's fine, for now," he said with a crooked smile. "But you have to play my game." He was a drifter. Later, we learned his name was Earl, a Midwestern drifter with a record for theft and other crimes. He had spent years on the run, hiding in cornfields and rural fairs, taking advantage of crowds. He lured children with candy or toys and dragged them into the maze paths when their parents were not looking. Sometimes he demanded ransom. Other times, he simply disappeared with them. Later, the police confirmed that they had already linked him to similar cases in Iowa, but no one had made the connection. "Give him back," Sophia screamed. He let out a laugh. "Follow me if you can, but one wrong step, and you lose him." He ran through the stalks. We chased after him, but he knew the maze by memory. He had cut secret paths, shortcuts through the corn. Sometimes we heard Tommy's voice calling, "Mommy," but it was him imitating it. My flashlight only caught flashes, his coat moving, then nothing. Sophia slipped in the mud, crying. I helped her up, but now we were lost too. For what felt like hours, the man played with us. "Over here," his voice would say through laughter, and then silence. We found Tommy's other sneaker, covered in mud. My mind filled with horrible images. Ransom notes, missing children, bodies found in ditches. I knew Nebraska kept secrets in its plains. Then finally we heard him for real. "Dad," a voice cried out between sobs. We ran, crashing through a wall of corn into a clearing. There was Tommy tied to a post, gagged, his eyes wide with terror. The drifter jumped out from the side with a rusty knife. I went after him without thinking. We hit the ground, struggling in the dirt. He cut my arm, but I managed to grab hold of him. Sophia picked up a rock and struck his hand. The knife fell. He screamed. I pinned him down, shouting for help. Minutes later, the sheriffs arrived with flashlights and dogs. They arrested the man and freed Tommy. He was okay, just terrified and freezing. It turned out the drifter had been watching us all day, waiting for Tommy to wander away. He planned to demand a $5,000 ransom and hide out in a nearby abandoned silo. That night, as we drove home, Tommy slept in the back seat. Sophia and I barely said a word. The corn maze was closed for a week. But even now, sometimes I wake up in a panic, hearing that whistle in the wind. And I made myself a promise. I will never set foot in a corn maze again. Story 6. In December 2007, my family's life changed forever. My cousin Leah Hickman was only 21 years old. She was a smart, kind young woman, full of energy and dreams. She was just beginning to build her future. She worked at a beauty salon in Huntington, West Virginia, and lived in a small apartment building near the Marshall University campus. I remember the last time I saw her. It was shortly before Christmas. Leah was happy, excited for the holidays, talking about how much she was looking forward to having a few days off from work. She was always smiling, always making plans. No one could have imagined what was about to happen. On the night of December 14th, Leah finished her shift at the salon and returned to her apartment. She lived on the third floor of a modest brick building, nothing special from the outside. The kind of place where students or young working people usually live. But inside, that place always gave me a strange feeling. The hallways were narrow, the lights were dim, and the atmosphere was too quiet at night. She shared the apartment with her half-sister, but that night she was alone. She spoke on the phone with a few friends in the early evening, and after that, silence. No one heard from her again. The next day, when Leah did not show up for work, her coworkers began to worry. She was responsible, punctual, and never missed work without saying something. First, the salon tried calling her, no answer. Then her sister, nothing. That night, my aunt, her mother, was already desperate. Leah always checked in, always answered messages. For her not to do that, it was completely out of character. We went together to her apartment. I will never forget walking up those stairs with the naive hope of finding her there, laughing and apologizing for the worry. But the door was locked. Her car was still parked outside, and inside were her purse and her shoes. Everything was in order, as if she had stepped out for a moment and was about to come back any second. But Leah was not there. There were no signs of a struggle, nothing broken, no mess. It was as if she had simply vanished. The police arrived quickly. They searched the area, spoke with the neighbors, and knocked on every door in the building. Some people said they had heard footsteps late at night, but no one could say for sure. The worst part was the basement, an old space with damp, dark storage units. The police inspected it, but at first they found nothing. The place was chilling. Cold concrete, the smell of mold, and silence. The days passed. Posters went up all over Huntington. The family stayed glued to the phone, waiting for any news. I tried to sleep, but my mind would not stop. I kept imagining her alone, scared, wondering if she was still alive. On December 19th, 5 days after her disappearance, officers returned to the basement, and that was where they found her. Leah's body was hidden in a cramped space beneath the stairs. Even now, writing it makes me sick. Knowing that she had been so close, right beneath us while we were searching for her, is something I will never be able to erase. The case became major news across all of West Virginia. People wanted answers. Who could do something like that to such a sweet, hardworking young woman with no enemies? The police questioned everyone, friends, co-workers, neighbors in the building. Rumors surfaced, stories spread, supposed witnesses came forward, but nothing concrete. To this day, no one has been arrested for her murder. The case remains unsolved. What is most disturbing is how ordinary that night was before everything happened. Leah left work, came home, maybe thought about Christmas, maybe turned on the television or got ready for bed. And at some point, someone entered her life and extinguished it. Without noise, without witnesses, only silence. What hurts me most is imagining how alone she must have felt. An apartment is supposed to be a safe place, your refuge. But for Leah, it was the place where her life was taken from her. Sometimes I drive past that building in Huntington, and I still get chills. From the outside, it looks normal, like any other place. Students and young people coming and going, having no idea what happened inside. I wonder whether any of them know Leah's story, or whether to them it is just another old building near campus. In our family, we keep her memory alive, but it is hard to do that without justice. We do not know who took her from us, or why. And that is the most terrifying part, thinking that the person responsible could still be out there. Someone cold enough to abduct a young woman, hide her body just a few feet from her home, and then disappear as if nothing had happened. Every time I think about it, I feel that same cold knot in my stomach, because this could happen to anyone. Leah was only 21 years old. She had her whole future ahead of her. And on an ordinary December night, she disappeared forever. Story 7. Hello, my name is Hugh, and I am a police sergeant with the New York City Police Department, assigned to the Bronx. It was not my dream job. In fact, my original plan was to become an actor after graduating from college. But auditions for television shows and films never worked out, and in the end, the police force became my alternative. During my shifts, I usually dealt with complicated situations, though not necessarily dangerous ones. Sometimes I responded to calls involving people in crisis, and most of the time everything ended without major incident. But I had never experienced a night as devastating as the one I am about to describe. It was October 2016, around 6 p.m., when we received a 911 call. A group of neighbors reported that a woman was acting erratically in her apartment building on Pugsley Avenue in the Castle Hill neighborhood. It was not the first time they had called about her, so I was assigned to the case along with my team. The dispatch information indicated that this might involve a person in emotional distress. When we arrived at the scene, an emergency medical technician was already there, speaking with the woman in her living room. She was holding a pair of scissors, but she had set them down on a table and seemed to be starting to calm down. She was not armed at that moment, and the emergency medical technician was explaining why we had come. Instead of stopping to fully assess the situation, I made a quick decision to approach her myself and try to calm her down. I thought I could handle it. The woman, who looked to be in her 60s, backed into her bedroom when we approached. My reflexes kicked in, and I followed her, with a couple of officers behind me. I spoke to her in a calm voice, telling her that she was safe, that we only wanted to help. At first, she picked up the scissors again, but I managed to convince her to place them on the bed. She did, and for a moment I thought everything was going to be resolved, but everything changed in seconds. I moved closer to keep her from grabbing them again, trying to restrain her carefully. According to protocol, we should have waited for additional support or used non-lethal methods, but I believed I could control the situation. She was faster. Suddenly, she pulled out a baseball bat that she had hidden under a pillow. She gripped it tightly, took a batter's stance, and stepped toward me. My heart was pounding in my chest. I drew my weapon and stepped back a little, shouting at her, "Please drop the bat. I do not want to hurt you." I repeated those words over and over. The other officers were in the doorway, but I was the closest to her, inside the room. She did not obey. She raised the bat and started swinging it toward my head. In that instant, I knew it. If she hit me, she could kill me immediately. I had no choice. I fired twice. The bullet struck her in the torso. She fell to the floor and the bat rolled beside her. At first, she was moving, moaning. Then she became still. I kept my gun raised, trembling, repeating commands that no longer made sense. I called for medical assistance over the radio, my voice breaking. The emergency medical technician who had already been there ran in, and we began cardiopulmonary resuscitation while the paramedics were on their way. When they arrived, they took over, but it was too late. She was pronounced dead at the hospital. Her name was Deborah Danner. She was 66 years old. She had been living with schizophrenia for decades. Later, we learned that she had been going through a severe episode. She was not using drugs. Her illness simply made her unpredictable. She had written essays about her experience, about how living with that disorder was like carrying a curse, one that should never have cost her her life. After the shooting, I fell apart. I did not cry, but I felt an unbearable weight, a mixture of guilt and despair. Why did she have to raise that bat? I muttered over and over. I had never fired my weapon in a situation like that. I had handled dozens of crises without ever drawing it. But in that split second, it was her or me. Even so, the doubts tortured me. Should I have waited for the crisis intervention team? Used my taser? The manual said to de-escalate, call for specialized support. But everything happened in a matter of seconds. What followed was a nightmare. Less than 6 hours later, I was suspended from active duty. They took my weapon and my badge. The mayor publicly stated that I had failed to follow protocol, implying that if I had, she would still be alive. The next day, there were protests. People marched from the building to the precinct, shouting Black Lives Matter slogans and condemning police brutality. Deborah was black, and I am white. My name became a point of national debate. Months later, I was arrested and charged with second-degree manslaughter. The trial was long and exhausting. There was no jury, only a judge. I had to testify in detail about every movement, every decision. I explained that I entered the bedroom to keep her from arming herself again, but that she was faster. When she raised the bat, I saw my life flash before my eyes. In 2018, the judge acquitted me of all charges, concluding that I had acted in justified self-defense. But even though the legal system cleared me, the guilt is still there. Sometimes I catch myself reliving that moment, wondering whether I could have done something differently. One of my fellow officers, Edward, helped with the resuscitation efforts for nearly 10 minutes. We hoped she would survive. She did not. I am still a police officer. I returned to duty after the trial. I have been fortunate. Nothing that chaotic has happened again. But that night changed me forever. It was the kind of story no officer ever wants to be part of. A lesson that reminds me day after day how fragile an encounter between the law and the human mind can be. We need better training, more resources, and above all, more humanity. Because no one, neither a civilian nor an officer, should ever have to face a decision like that. And no one should die that way. Story 8. In 2013, I traveled to San Juan, Puerto Rico to attend my brother's destination wedding. The warm sea air, the joyful commotion of family gathered together, the laughter and the music. Everything felt like a dream. I was 18 years old, just stepping into adulthood, and I was sharing a room at the resort with my older sister and her boyfriend. Everything was supposed to be perfect, but something was not. The first sign was subtle. It was around 8 p.m. and we were quietly relaxing in the room. My sister was reading, her boyfriend was checking his phone, and I was simply resting. Then the room phone rang. I answered. On the other end, a male voice, rough and icy, said, "This is the front desk. You need to quiet down. You are making too much noise." His tone was so sharp it made my skin crawl. But we were not making any noise. No television, no music, just light conversation. I thought maybe it was a prank from my father, always such a joker, and I asked, "Are you serious?" "Very serious," the man growled and hung up. I called my father right away. It was not him, and his voice sounded worried. My sister and her boyfriend exchanged confused looks. We tried to brush it off, shrugged it away, and went down to the jacuzzi to meet the other guests. We tried to forget about it, but something in the atmosphere had changed, like a faint smell you know should not be there. Hours later, well past midnight, we returned to the room. Everything felt different, more tense. We got ready for bed, trying to relax. Then the phone rang again. It was the same voice, the same tone of restrained anger. "You think you're funny," he spat, running through the hallways like animals. "Enough." I swallowed hard. "We have not left the room," I replied, my voice shaking. The man hung up again. This time I called the front desk directly. A woman answered with a calm, professional voice. I explained what had happened. She was silent for a few seconds and then said, alarmed, "Miss, no one from the hotel has called your room tonight. I'm going to send security." 15 minutes later, an employee in a spotless suit knocked on our door. He had dark circles under his eyes and looked exhausted. He spoke softly, almost in a whisper. "We believe the calls are coming from a guest in the hallway. We already know who he is. He has caused problems before. We have asked him to leave tomorrow. We are very sorry for the disturbance. Please do not answer if he contacts you again." We nodded, uncomfortable. The moment he closed the door, the phone rang again. This time my sister's boyfriend answered. In a firm voice, he said, "There is a man in this room." The caller hung up without saying anything. We decided to unplug the phone. I wish that had been the end of it. Around 3 a.m., I was awakened by a soft sound like scratching. I sat up slowly. The other two were asleep. I held my breath and listened carefully. The sound came again. Something brushing against the door, slowly, steadily. I got up cautiously. Through the gap beneath the door, I saw a shadow, a motionless silhouette standing just on the other side. I did not open it. I stood there, frozen, until the shadow disappeared. At dawn, exhausted, we opened our eyes through nervous yawns, and we saw a piece of paper slipped under the door. It was a sheet from the hotel notepad, written in shaky, masculine handwriting. It said, "You ruined my night. I hope you understand now how it feels." I heard every word, every step. I do not forget those who keep me from sleeping. There was no name, no room number, only those words. A chill ran through me. We had not been noisy. We had done nothing. That man had been listening to us. He knew when we had come back, when we went to bed, when we were asleep. He had been there right outside the door while we rested. The hotel staff acted quickly. They confirmed that the man had checked out that same morning. Security reviewed the hallway cameras, but they did not show us anything. We never found out who he was. We never saw him, not even his name. The rest of the trip was torture. I slept in jolts. Every creak in the walls woke me up. I checked the peephole every few minutes. I avoided the elevators. What terrified me most was not the calls, but how easily that stranger slipped into our lives for 2 days without ever showing himself. Even now, when the phone rings unexpectedly at night, my heart starts racing, because I have not forgotten that voice, and I know I never will.